One disadvantage of how much and how quickly we read is I end up remembering pitifully little. Thankfully, one tutor advantage is we get more than one chance at a class. It usually takes me 2 rounds for anything to stick. When something does lodge in my memory, I notice. A few years ago, I did freshman seminar right after sophomore seminar, and some seeming similarities between the romances in Aristophanes' speech in the Symposium and the 2nd chapter of Genesis stuck with me. I'll summarize those similarities in terms of 3 moments of Eros. Both stories begin with the first moment, a strange, forgotten past. Plato's Aristophanes tells us that back in our earliest days, what we now regard as an individual human being made up 1/2 of a sphere. With our aerodynamical shape, faces on 2 sides, and 8 limbs, we could run fast in all directions. Aware of our might, we attempted to overthrow the gods. Zeus figured out a way to keep us around while also putting us in our place. He cut those rebellious spheres in half. In Genesis, even with God and lots of plants and animals to hang around with, the first human being was lonely. God put it to sleep, removed a rib, and built a second human being. Both these strange pasts tell of a pre-established unity between the future members of a couple. In Eros' second moment, supposed strangers feel an immediate and intense unity with one another. Aristophanes tells of how, because every sphere was divided in 2, each of us yearns for our other half, and as soon as we find it, we join together, throwing our arms around each other, and we try to merge. In Genesis, when the first human first encounters its newly created partner, he says, and I'm quoting, "The one at last, bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." A similar phrase is used elsewhere in the Torah when one person discovers that another he's just met is a member of his biological family. The man's love for the woman has him instantaneously regard her as a member of his family without the usual shared lineage or common early history. These stories share a third erotic moment. The unity of the couple becomes a future task as its members want their union to endure and deepen. Before Zeus compassionately intervened, when the halves found each other, they would cling together and neglect all else to the point of death. But even after Zeus made some changes, Aristophanes claims that what every lover wants is to be, and I'm quoting, united and welded with the beloved in order to be made one out of 2, and to stay that way for life. In Genesis, the narrator regards the one flesh unity the man instantly experiences with the woman as a task that is still unfolding. I'm quoting, "Therefore does a man leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and they become one flesh." One flesh unity represents all the ways that the husband and wife will forge a shared life together, thus establishing a new household and a new family. These 3 moments I've just shared summarize the similarities that wouldn't leave me alone. But a handful of similarities don't make up an inquiry. In my sophomore year of college, my favorite professor, Dr. Robertson, sat me down for a chat. I assumed he wanted to tell me how brilliant my last essay had been. Instead, he said, "Ron, you really ought to know by now, comparison essays are a trap." I had written 3 papers for him that semester. First, a comparison of Luther and Erasmus on the nature of divine mystery. Second, a comparison of Descartes and Locke on the nature of perception. And third, a comparison of Hume and Voltaire on the nature of skepticism. According to Dr. Robertson, my essays had amounted to no more than an inventory of similarities and differences. While that's a certain kind of accomplishment, an inventory is neither a focused inquiry nor a coherent argument. Last summer, after I read a draft of the first paragraphs of this lecture to myself, I suddenly heard a voice say, "Ron, you really ought to know by now, comparison essays are a trap." One way out of the comparison essay trap is to find a question amidst the inventory. Why do I care about these similarities? Why wouldn't they leave me alone? One strange coincidence of my life is that the 3 different countries I have lived in have each extended the legal right to marry to same-sex couples while I've been living there. Even when I've tried to avoid the surrounding debates, I couldn't. And as a gay man, those debates often gave me the impression that my sexuality and my relationship were being judged, because they were. Now, political deliberation requires making judgments. It's not the judgments I object to, but their quality, and my disappointment applies to all sides. So tonight, among my comrades at my beloved college, with the kind of help only great books can give, I don't want to shy away from getting judgmental about Eros. I want to learn how to do it better. And both our stories do end up getting judgmental. While Aristophanes can seem inclusive, it's finally gay male couples that most garner his praise. And in Genesis, the married man and the woman are the erotic heroes. With the similarities I've identified, these 2 stories have much in common, based on the widely shared experience of being in love. And yet they also differ on a question with much at stake when they come to judge which couple is the best exemplar of Eros. One of our guiding questions for tonight, then, is what criteria are at work in these judgments? We'll pursue that question in part 1 of this lecture. Later, in part 2, we'll get judgmental about Eros on another front. As you can tell by now, this lecture is going to be all Eros all the time. This inquiry, like most, is a kind of dissection. If, as Augustine thinks, every human being is a bundle of loves, our focus this evening is a narrow one. But as in freshman lab, even though you might spend most of the practicum examining a fish's eye, you do so for better understanding the whole fish. Perhaps in the question period or in other conversations, you might help me consider how Eros fits in with our whole bundle of loves. Part 1, Judging Erotic Heroes. Back to Aristophanes. On a first read, it can seem like he would be welcome to celebrate with those unruly queers and their allies at Pride. His story provides an origin for 3 of what we would now call sexual orientations: straight, gay, and lesbian. The 3 kinds of spherical humans resembled 3 divine planets, with the manly sphere corresponding to the sun, the womanly sphere to the earth, and the combo sphere to the moon. In humanity's early days, neither Eros nor sexuality existed. But once we got cut up, Eros and sexuality arrived together, as the halves are attracted based on their original spheres. This seems to treat all 3 orientations as more or less equal, as each traces its origin back to natural differences between the planets. By the end of his speech, though, Aristophanes gives the erotic gold to gay couples, so perhaps he wouldn't be so welcome at Pride after all. The criterion for his judgment is largely implicit in the assessments he makes of the 3 kinds of couples. He notes that heterosexuals apparently tend to cheat on one another. While he mentions lesbians, he neither praises nor condemns them, and he saves the best for last. He says that when a younger man falls in love with an older one, he is attracted to his, and I'm quoting, daring and courage and manliness. So earlier, all couples seem to be ranked equally, according to what I'll call the criterion of unity. Every kind of couple tries their best to recover humanity's original unity, and all can achieve some pale imitation of it. While Zeus has ensured we'll never get back to our glory days, we can still make some progress. But then in his later assessments of each couple, Aristophanes introduces a second criterion, that of spiritedness. The three couples are judged on how well their relationship embodies the daring that once defined us. The male couple are the erotic heroes because the complementarity of an intergenerational gay couple increases each man's manliness. They are similar in that both are men, which Aristophanes likely regards as the most spirited sex, but they are different in terms of age, and so each embodies a different developmental stage in a man's life. The younger man is educated in what it means to be a man by the older one, and the older one is roused from the sluggishness of adulthood by the other's youth. Apparently, Aristophanes tells us, it's these kind of men who will go on to serve honorably in politics. Straight people, meanwhile, their frequent bouts of adultery are a banal and tediously disruptive way to try and recover our ancient daring. It seems lesbians deserve the erotic silver because they're neither tediously disruptive like the straights, nor admirably manly like the gays. They earn their middle place, it seems, by being mediocre. Perhaps Aristophanes thought women lacked spiritedness, or maybe he just didn't know much about lesbians. While all three couples may more or less approximate our original unity, Aristophanes judges that it is the intergenerational gay couple which rank highest in spiritedness. Let's pause to think some more about lesbians. As my grandmother always taught me, don't neglect the lesbians. She didn't actually teach me that. I want to supplement Aristophanes' speech with the poet Audre Lorde's essay, The Uses of Eros. While she doesn't mention the Symposium, she seems to agree that Eros unlocks spiritedness. She describes Eros, and I'm quoting, as a source of power, a replenishing and provocative force. While I believe Lorde's insights can apply to all of us, in her essay she foregrounds her identity as a black lesbian, and she focuses on the consequences of that provocative, erotic force for women who have suffered injustice because of their race, sex, or sexuality. There is a particular power, she claims, when women gather apart from men and their unions, like dancing, conversing, and sexual intimacy, result in shared joy. The complementarity present in such unions includes the similarity the women share because of how they have suffered injustice. Yet Lorde also emphasizes that it is crucial that the women are other to one another in ways big and small, so that the shared joy only comes when they transcend themselves as individuals and are changed as a result. This shared joy binds the members of the couple together and may alter their other relationships. While these couplings take place in private, their participants may be empowered to act differently in public. I'm quoting, "For having experienced the fullness of this depth of feeling and having recognized its power, in honor and self-respect, we can require no less of ourselves." If I follow Lorde's argument, it is that erotic relationships may cultivate an alternative sense of self. The experience of joy becomes a measure by which they judge their other relationships, thus birthing social and political action and advocacy for themselves and others. I suspect that Lorde would challenge Aristophanes' judgment of lesbians. For her, when women's increased sense of self-respect encounters injustice, they don't back away from a fight. Sounds like the female couples Lorde has in mind might try and topple the gods. Both Aristophanes and Lord then judge their erotic heroes according to spiritedness, and they do so by a shared norm, which is human nature. For both, Eros realizes some potential in us by which the selves that emerge reflect what is highest in us. As we turn now to Genesis, we'll see here too that an understanding of human nature serves as the norm by which the erotic heroes are judged. In Genesis 1, human beings are earth dwellers like most other animals, but only we are created in God's image. In Genesis 2, we are made of the same soily stuff as the earth itself and all its inhabitants, but only we are brought to life by divine breath. Human beings then are a meeting place of heaven and earth as we integrate within our nature both divine and animal aspects. Because of this, we can represent the God who rules in heaven to the creatures who dwell on earth. One way we do so is by continuing God's creative work. Over the 6 days of creation, God engages in two main activities: forming and filling. On some days, God forms places. On others, God fills them up. On the second day, for instance, God forms the sky. Then on the fourth day, God fills it with the sun and the moon. Day by day, the interplay of forming and filling creates a world which abounds with a wondrous diversity of creatures, each with their own home and task, each serving to enliven and enrich the world. Recall that after the man greeted the woman with a poem, the narrator added, and I'm quoting, "Therefore does a man leave his father and his mother and cling to his wife, and they become one flesh." Erotic love nudges the man out of his parents' home toward the woman, with whom he will form a new home. Familial love is a centripetal force, an instinctual love of what you inherited, which handed on to you an identity and a way of life. Erotic love is a centrifugal force, a love of the unknown, offering the possibility of a new identity and a new way of life. In order to see how Genesis judges Eros, then, we now ask, how does the heterosexual couple continue God's work of filling and forming the earth? Well, filling is easy. The biological complementarity of man and woman makes filling the earth possible through procreation. Human beings may share with God in the joys and sorrows of bringing new life into the world. And children are welcomed into and raised, ideally, within a loving community which pre-existed them, that of their mother and father, who were first wife and husband. Yet it's not breeding alone that distinguishes human beings. Many other animals do that. Filling up the world must be paired with our forming work. One description of such forming comes when God places the first human being in the garden to, and I'm quoting, "till and keep it." With tilling, humans oversee the growth of the garden, deciding what God-given potential to develop. With keeping, we protect the life of the garden. By doing so, human beings make the garden into a home. Of course, all sorts of creatures form homes. Yet there is a distinctive kind of human hospitality, given that we alone are the meeting place of heaven and earth, who integrate divine and animal aspects into our very nature. Our homes can become like little worlds as we welcome and care for and live among some bustling segment of the community of living things. As God formed the world and filled it with such a diversity of creatures, it is our human work to embody in our own ways that expansive divine hospitality. But can such homes only be established by Adam plus Eve? What about Adam and Steve, or Eve and Neve? Just as the biological complementarity of man and woman is distinctly suited to filling a home, so the perspectival complementarity of man and woman is distinctly suited to forming a home. Now, what do I mean by that clunky phrase, perspectival complementarity? Well, the man is made directly from the soil, and his identity is shaped by his early relationships with the earth and other animals. From his time without the woman, he's very well aware of his neediness. The man, then, is the original human being most attuned to our animal aspect. His desire is most of all for his wife. The woman is not made directly from the soil, but built from the man's rib. She is more removed from the earth and is a more refined version of human nature. Her identity is shaped most not by the earth or its other inhabitants, but by a fellow human being, the man, who greets her by using one of our most godlike capacities, language, and he does so very well with a poem. The woman's title as the man's helper confirms this sense, because everywhere else where that term is used in the Hebrew Bible, it describes God. The woman, then, is the original human being most attuned to our divine aspect, which includes our distance from the earth and our distinction from the other animals. Her desire is most of all for wisdom. Because of this perspectival complementarity, to get a full human perspective, the man and woman need each other. The man and woman are distinctly qualified to form a home that is a little world because of their complementary attunements. The woman will ensure that their home is hospitable to their divine aspect through the search for wisdom. The man will ensure their home is hospitable to their animal aspect, welcoming in their fellow earth dwellers and remaining aware of human fragility and finitude. The perspectival complementarity of man and woman, then, means that their homes will reflect what is best about our human nature, that we are the meeting place of heaven and earth. Let's now gather together what we've learned about how to judge Eros from Genesis, Plato's Aristophanes, and Lord. All our texts seem to agree that Eros helps to realize some precious potential of our nature, as the wholeness offered through erotic unions empowers us to transcend our individual selves. At work in their judgments is an understanding of what human nature looks like at its best. For Aristophanes, that was during our early and glorious spherical days. All couples meet the criterion of unity as they recover some degree of wholeness together, but the intergenerational gay couple is distinct according to the criterion of spiritedness, as their enhanced manliness sets them apart. For Lord, I suggested she shares Aristophanes' criterion of spiritedness, but for her, the shared joy of erotic unions between women may cultivate a heightened sense of self-respect, which fosters political action for justice. And just now in Genesis, we saw that human beings are responsible for continuing God's creative work of filling and forming the world. The heterosexual couple can do so by their biological complementarity, by which they fill their home with new human life, and their perspectival complementarity, by which their home reflects the fullness of our nature, hospitable to life both divine and earthly. That criterion I'll call expansive hospitality. I'm tempted at this point to lapse into my old habit of compiling an inventory of similarities and differences. Let me instead confine myself to one particular difference that has much to do with how to judge Eros. Aristophanes is on one side of this division, with Genesis and Lord on the other. For Aristophanes, the members of the couple look primarily inward, toward one another, whereas for Genesis and Lord, The members of the couple face one another, and intensely so, yet their relationship also involves looking outward to the world. I haven't mentioned so far that in Aristophanes' speech, Zeus has a plan A which goes disastrously wrong, requiring a plan B. After Zeus chopped the spheres in half, they kept dying off, refusing to do anything else but hang on to one another. Out of pity, Zeus comes up with a plan B and invents sex as we know it. Thanks to that very clever invention, the intensity of our desire can temporarily lessen, and our couplings can even prove useful occasionally, especially when heterosexuals have kids or gay men get day jobs in politics. Aristophanes neglects to say anything about lesbians. The plan A, plan B structure of his story suggests that romance as we know it is a compromised version of the earlier, purer form of Eros. For one thing, erotic union is about much, much more than sex, and yet now, thanks to the invention of sex, we can get overly focused on our genitals. For another thing, Zeus found a way to make Eros useful for himself and humanity. Now, he may have done the right thing, as thanks to him, the human race continued, and we may be made a bit less cuckoo by love. Yet, even so, the implication is that making Eros useful is a diminishment of its original purity, when the couple's unity and the renewed life it offered them was all that mattered. On this account, the couple's own integrity is the highest good, and any beneficial consequences of their relationship to the world is a pragmatic compromise imposed on us by a wily politician, Zeus. In contrast, for Genesis and Lord, the very wholeness made possible by erotic unions, which comes from the members of the couple facing one another, then leads to a looking outward. In Genesis, the home of the man and woman is a small world, imaging God's own expansive hospitality. And for Lord, the shared sense of joy women discover with one another generates political action. There is a weighty difference here about how to judge Eros. Is the erotic wholeness of the couple an end in itself, a means to some other end, or somehow both? It's time to enlist Socrates' help. In his speech in the Symposium, he shares what he learned from a local erotics expert, Diotima. For Diotima, Eros is, and I'm quoting, love for the good to be one's own forever. We strive to do so, and I'm quoting again, by bearing offspring in the presence of a beautiful thing by means of the body and soul. So we're all pregnant in body and soul, as our bodies and souls desire to transcend themselves, to be immortal. We can see this in our body's growth and decay, shedding one configuration for another, just as do our souls with their ever-shifting thoughts and feelings. The best route for immortality is by giving birth, whether a body birth or a soul birth. That's how we most fully transcend ourselves, as some descendant, like a child or an insight or a poem or some laws, lives apart from us and can take on a life of its own. For Diotima, Eros abounds, as we are all pregnant to some degree in both body and soul, and this includes love both queer and straight. Diotima's account shares then with our other three an emphasis on the transformation of the lover, as some lesser version of the self is transcended through the relationship with the beloved. Yet for Diotima, the birth, whether of soul or body, is not an imposition or diminution of Eros, as Aristophanes has it. As I understand it, Diotima holds that the momentum of Eros includes not only the self-transcendence of the members of the couple, but the further transcendence of the couples themselves by what they bring to birth, what new or renewed forms of life they welcome. Of course, I'm sure we can all think of couples who appear to us to be not very pregnant in body or soul. Like Aristophanes' couples in Zeus's Plan A, their gaze seems turned entirely at one another. Let's assume that some of those judgments we make, at least, are accurate. Perhaps Diotima's account gives us a way to judge between more immature and more mature manifestations of Eros. Aristophanes' speech seems to suggest this too, though for him the maturity needs to be imposed by an authority figure when Zeus finally steps in. For Diotima, and I take it for Genesis and Lord, the momentum of Eros itself will bring new or renewed life that exceeds the couple. Any flourishing union of two should involve the birth of some third, whether body births or soul births, a new life which takes on a life of its own, further transforming the members of the couple and extending to others too. We've had many examples of such births earlier. Diotima's account of Eros as pregnancy resonates with much that is present in our other texts and gives us a criterion by which to judge the maturity of a couple, the criterion of generation. In short, to alter a phrase, you can judge a couple by their fruitfulness. Before we move to the second part of this lecture and get to be judgmental on another front, there are some unaddressed questions I at least want to articulate, particularly about Genesis. What does Genesis' account of the distinctiveness of heterosexual couples mean for those of us who don't see ourselves in it? Like straight couples who don't want to have children or who, for a variety of reasons, can't. Or a single person who doesn't want to partner up or who hasn't found the right one yet and might not. Or queer couples who might be at work forming the world but can't play a role in the procreative filling of it. I think one could argue that Genesis depicts why couples like Adam and Eve are foundational to the flourishing of societies, but that need not mean that Genesis is prescribing a universal norm. One version of this could be Aristophanes' ranking of couples, but in the reverse order, with the Genesis model for straight couples at the top of the list, but other couples still worthy of some praise. Of course, many of the communities most devoted to Genesis have not seen things that way. They judge that sexual intimacy is appropriate only within a marriage between a man and a woman. On our program, we have thinkers who make that case in books that we read. Two of my favorites are Paul and Augustine. In our conversation in the question period or elsewhere, we may want to take up these kinds of arguments by considering Paul's condemnation of homoeroticism in Romans, or Augustine's argument for why all sexual acts ought to be open to procreation, which is gestured at in Confessions. A good place to start might be by understanding what each of them means by natural. Needless to say, I have a dog in that fight, but so do all of us. Part 2. Judging individual integrity. So far, we've given a largely positive account of Eros. But we all know how dangerous and even destructive Eros can be. In this second part of the lecture, we'll consider one kind of threat erotic unions pose to us. I can't tell whether Plato's Aristophanes intends to address this, but for me he does. There is a moment of his speech I find horrifying. He claims if Hephaestus asked any couple if they wanted to be permanently welded together, their answer would be yes. Aristophanes' story supports this response. The sphere people didn't only have one body, but I assume one mind. Now, I believe I deeply love, adore, and admire my partner, but I'd tell Hephaestus to leave us the hell alone and go work on a shield. I don't want the self-transcendence of Eros to come at the cost of my self-dissolution. I also can't shake the sense that much of what I love about my partner is that he is other than me. And that includes all the ways he insists on having a mind of his own and spends many hours of each day apart from me. But maybe independence is a small price to pay for more spiritedness. Many of the moments in our lives when we feel most alive come when our sense of self dims and we are temporarily absorbed into a greater whole. This applies to romantic couples, but also sports teams, musical ensembles, political rallies, religious worship, and of course, St. John's seminars. My concern is that Aristophanes makes the wholeness or integrity of the couple the ultimate good, and our individual integrity might be under threat. My hunch is that individual integrity need not compromise erotic unity, but is an essential element of it. So how then can we judge when individual integrity is under threat by our erotic entanglements? We return again to that startling claim in Genesis that every human being is created in the image of God, dust enlivened with divine breath, and so our primary responsibility is to represent God in the world. We exercise that responsibility with our fellow human beings, especially in Genesis 2 with our spouse, and that responsibility includes care for the earth's other creatures. One criterion for individual integrity, then, is the cultivation of our essential relationships, by which we realize the fullness of our nature as the meeting place of heaven and earth. But when they ate that fruit, the man and woman each failed to do so, though in contrasting ways. At that fateful moment in the garden when the woman is talking to the serpent, the man stands silently by, and when she offers the fruit, he eats it. This is, I'd say, an example of choosing erotic union over individual integrity. In neither questioning his partner nor refusing to go along with her, he compromised 3 of his relationships by abdicating the responsibilities that go with them. First, his responsibility to God, who told him not to eat from that tree. Second, his responsibility to protect the garden, as that fruit was not for human consumption. And third, his responsibility to his wife, as she could not tame the serpent without his help. As the human being most attuned to his earthly aspect, he was acutely aware of the pain of loneliness, and so decided to cling to his wife. In so doing, instead of integrating our divine and animal aspects, and so cultivating his essential relationships, he set them in opposition to one another. In the woman's case, the serpent entrapped her by appealing to her love of wisdom, which as the human being most attuned to our divine aspect was her greatest longing. The man compromised all his other relationships to maintain his erotic union with his wife, while the woman compromised all her other relationships to pursue her erotic union with wisdom. She attempts to become like God apart from God. She chows down after only speaking with the serpent, not saying even a word to her husband. And by eating the fruit, she fails to protect the garden by violating it herself. She too compromises her individual integrity by pitting heaven against earth, divine in opposition to animal. From Genesis's point of view, it seems, that's not the way to wisdom. God's response to their fateful, fruitful decision is telling. Since plan A seems to have failed, God makes a number of adjustments for plan B. One is the invention of patriarchy. Whereas before the woman's primary desire was for wisdom, God redirects her desire to be for her husband, who we're told will rule over her. God's strategy seems to be that the human experiment might get less out of hand if the human more attuned to our earthly aspect is put in charge. The rest of the Hebrew Bible, starting in Genesis 4, has some stories to tell about how that turned out. The main point for our purposes is that when she decides to eat the fruit, the woman too pursues erotic union at the expense of her individual integrity. She compromises relationships that are essential to the fullness of her humanity. Now back to Socrates. As far as I can tell, Diotima doesn't think that lovers should take Hephaestus up on his offer. She too has an account of individual integrity which can help us to judge when an erotic union is making inappropriate demands. Let's go back to one of her definitions of eros. It is, I'm quoting, love for the good to be one's own forever. Notice the one's own. For Diotima, the individual's erotic desire is centered on the good becoming hers. And that can't happen from cultivating your soul, which is one criterion Diotima has to judge individual integrity. In a lengthy section of Socrates' speech, Diotima implicitly structures her analysis according to the three parts of the soul. Recall from the Republic that the appetitive part of the soul is most attuned to the satisfactions of the body, the spirited part to one's sense of honor, and the reasoning part to calculation. Socrates argues in the Republic that because of its ability to calculate, the rational part, and I'm quoting, has within it knowledge of what is advantageous, both for each part and for the whole, the community composed of all three. Back to Diotima. If I'm reading her right, when you are more pregnant in body, then eros can take up residence in either the appetitive or spirited parts of your soul, as you strive for immortality by making babies who will outlive you or gaining honor for your great deeds. When you are more pregnant in soul, eros is most present in either the spirited or reasoning parts of your soul, as you strive for immortality by gaining honor for great works or coming to know the truth. Diotima suggests that eros may cultivate the wholeness of an individual's soul without you even noticing it. If you want to have a flesh and blood child, eros is present in the appetitive part of your soul. But then once she's born, you'll go to great lengths to protect her, and you will be proud at her accomplishments. Eros seems to have moved up to the spirited part of your soul. With this movement, your quest for immortality has ascended, as you are no longer focused on the mere existence of your child. You now want her to be worthy of praise. In this way, the birth that came from the erotic union develops one's individual integrity. I find it hard to tell whether Diotima thinks a similar ascent can take place when eros is most present in the spirited part of the soul. You might think it's one small step for eros to move from the spirited to the reasoning part. But as far as I can tell, Diotima never says so. She does say that the spirited part of the soul can yield body births and soul births. The body births are great deeds you do for your beloved, which may garner you a long-lasting reputation. So eros can make you more courageous. And it may cultivate other virtues such as wisdom, evident in inventions or poems, and moderation and justice evident in laws and education. The range of births here is impressive, and they correspond to the four virtues of courage, moderation, wisdom, and justice. But the motivation is always love of honor. Whereas Diotima describes how eros can ascend from the appetitive to the spirited part of the soul, no such step is described with the spirited part. Why not? In the Symposium, Socrates and Diotima are relentlessly upbeat about eros. The brief for the speeches, after all, is to praise love. So that's what they do. Elsewhere, though, Socrates warns that love of honor endangers individual integrity. In the Gorgias, he taunts Callicles about his two lovers, some beautiful man and all the citizens of Athens. Socrates accuses Callicles of saying whatever his lovers want him to say. There isn't one Callicles, there are multiple, depending on what he needs to do or to say to keep his lovers on side. That is especially destructive to his individual integrity, as the citizens of Athens are so fickle. Though Callicles, I think, wouldn't admit it, he lives his life as though Hephaestus had welded him together with the people of Athens, utterly dependent on them for his sense of self and right and wrong. The love for honor can destroy our individual integrity when we bow to whatever will burnish our reputation in our lover's eyes. Now, while Socrates doesn't address this in the Symposium, I think Plato might, as we see a vivid description of what that looks like when Alcibiades crashes the party. In the Gorgias, Socrates claims that since one of his lovers is philosophy, he is in harmony with himself, because philosophy doesn't change her mind day by day. It seems that Eros is most alive in the reasoning part of Socrates' soul, and because of that, he can maintain his individual integrity no matter how seductive his other lovers get. If we return to the Symposium, Diotima's ladder of love maps out how Eros may cultivate the soul of a young Socrates, that budding philosopher. As she tells it, as you climb up the ladder, you become increasingly attuned to the manifold presence of beauty, and you also become less dependent on any one of its manifestations. In the earlier rungs, the philosopher is dependent on the beauty of young men in order to facilitate his learning. But even on those lower rungs, Socrates, as far as I can tell, is only looking, not touching. And what he brings to birth are speeches, not deeds or inventions. When Eros is most resident in the reasoning part of the soul, it seems less entangled with bodies than when Eros is in the lower parts. And then, as the philosopher ascends higher, he is no longer dependent on the beauty of human beings, as his beloved becomes laws and bodies of knowledge. And at the very top of the ladder, Socrates gazes by himself on the expansive sea of the beautiful and gives birth to true virtue. Diotima says that with each step, as the philosopher looks back at what he used to fixate on, he now sees it as a trifling thing. But judging that beautiful bodies are inferior to beautiful souls doesn't mean you don't recognize the beauty of the beautiful bodies. When Eros is present in the reasoning part of the soul, the philosopher's attunement to beauty is more wide-ranging than if Eros were exclusively present in the appetitive or spirited parts, which are so narrowly concerned with bodies and honors. The other side of that more wide-ranging sensitivity to beauty is that you aren't welded to any one particular of its manifestations. Instead, your devotion is to the source of them all, the beautiful itself. There is much more that could be said and much that perplexes me about Diotima's ladder. Our main purpose for now, though, is that her ladder implies an account of individual integrity, as the philosopher's increasing sensitivity to the manifold presence of beauty also cultivates an independence from any one of its manifestations, especially the human ones. When Eros lives most in the reasoning part of the soul, then the philosopher pursues wisdom above all and subordinates all other erotic entanglements to that pursuit. Hephaestus probably shouldn't even bother asking. Conclusion. This evening we have gotten judgmental about Eros on two fronts. First, with our first set of romances, we asked what criteria were at work in their divergent judgments of their erotic heroes. In both stories, an understanding of human nature served as the norm. For Aristophanes, our glory days when we dared to topple the gods were human nature at its best. Couples are judged according to how well they conform to that standard according to two criteria: the unity of the couple and their spiritedness. The intergenerational gay male couple came out on top. Lord offered an illuminating alternative approach to the criterion of spiritedness, which argued for the fierce potential of female couples. For Genesis, our human calling is to represent God in the world as dust enlivened by divine breath. We alone are the meeting place of heaven and earth. Heterosexual couples are a small community which can forge homes that are small worlds, extending God's creative work of filling and forming creation, the criterion of expansive hospitality. Diotima's account of Eros' pregnancy illuminated and refined a dynamic we saw in our other texts, and gave us a criterion for erotic maturity, generation, or fruitfulness. In the second part, from my horror at Hephaestus' question, I wanted a way to judge when individual integrity might be under threat by erotic unions. Here too, understandings of human nature are what grounded the judgments. In Genesis, individual integrity consists in cultivating the essential relationships which define us as the meeting place of heaven and earth. In eating the fruit, the man and woman each opt for an erotic union in a way that compromises that individual integrity. For Diotima, individual integrity consists in cultivating our whole souls so that the reasoning part rules and we don't get erotically stuck with Eros confined to a lower part of our soul, thus holding us back in our pursuit of wisdom. At the top of the ladder, the philosopher stands alone, sensitive to the myriad presence of beauty in the world, but devoted most to the beautiful itself. And yet those last sentences imply we should forget about Aristophanes because Diotima tells us all we should know. But in the Symposium, Socrates can't seem to shake Aristophanes, and maybe he doesn't want to. After Socrates completes his speech, Aristophanes opens his mouth to respond before Alcibiades barges in. Then at the end, when everyone else has left or collapsed, it's only Aristophanes and Agathon who are still awake, talking with Socrates. Socrates can't seem to shake Aristophanes, and maybe he doesn't want to. Plato is giving his readers some homework, as he always does, because the inquiry of a dialogue doesn't end when the dialogue does. We misunderstand Diotima's ladder if we think it's the final, settled, systematic account of Eros. Aristophanes has more to say, and Plato wants us to figure out what that would be. Perhaps Diotima's ladder preserves our individual integrity, but at too great a cost. I hear Aristophanes piping up to ask lots of questions, including what about our bodies? Even with all their foolishness and fragility, aren't our bodies essential to our humanity and thus to our erotic lives? And what about our need for companionship? Might the philosopher's detachment from human beloveds fail to recognize that interdependence and even dependence can bear precious gifts? And what happens to spiritedness at the top of the ladder? Does the contemplative calm of the philosopher suppress the daring which frequently marks humanity at our best? I hear Genesis and Lord joining in with Aristophanes on some of these questions and adding their own. Even Diotima, apparently, has more to learn about how to be judgmental about Eros, and she can't do it on her own. That surely applies to us too. Please join me for the question period. Thank you.